Chapter 1: The Life of Lucifer and the Events He Precipitated. 1. The True Nature of Lucifer. Lucifer was created at the time God created all creatures. His status was that of an errand runner who would carry out various tasks that required attention in the Garden of Eden. God loved Lucifer. He closely inspected all the created beings in the Garden of Eden, developed them, and guided and taught Lucifer to enjoy them. For his part, Lucifer went throughout the garden in accordance with God's commands. He enjoyed his life there and was obedient to God. Later, God created Adam and Eve and set them in the position of his children. He directed Lucifer to look after, teach, and love Adam and Eve with all his heart. At first, Lucifer was extremely happy. He took pride in the fact that he was looking after God's children. He was moved by God's love for him, and he protected God's children and raised them with care. As time went on, though, Lucifer saw that Adam and Eve were growing up just fine with less and less need of his help. Gradually, Lucifer began to turn against God's love. Lucifer began to think, no matter how I look at it, I'm the one who was here first and worked hard to cultivate this garden. Why is it that God cares for and loves Adam and Eve more than me? The seed of resentment toward God was beginning to sprout within Lucifer's heart. Sometimes, Satan would protest to God, "Why do you give your work to Adam and Eve when you have never done so to me? Why do you reserve such special love for Adam and Eve? I am disappointed. How can you do this to me?" This is how he began to rebel against God. There were several incidents of this type, and eventually Lucifer came to the point in his heart where he no longer stood in the position that he needed to maintain. He began to think that he would like to live in the same position as Adam and Eve, and he began to have lustful feelings toward Eve. Gradually, Lucifer began to avoid being seen by God. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve were naive and followed Lucifer's every action. Lucifer acted as though he alone were their parent. He avoided God and acted as though he alone was the master of creation. He controlled Adam and Eve and gradually led them farther and farther away from God. He avoided God more and more and acted like a master, a king, and even the parent. And he began to tempt Eve. Adam wasn't aware of what was happening, so he would go wherever he wanted to go in the garden. Even as he grew older, he never understood the relationship that was developing between Lucifer and Eve. Adam did not have God's teaching, and Eve was always around Lucifer. So Adam became accustomed to being by himself as he grew older. When Lucifer was planting the seed of evil in Eve, God warned Lucifer that he should return to his post and maintain his position, but Lucifer's heart was already filled with curses for God. Lucifer no longer cared about his position or his station in life. God admonished Lucifer on many occasions. God admonished Lucifer from several angles to let him know that abandoning his position was a great sin in the eyes of God. Each time, though, Lucifer rebelled by telling God that anything God did in his position, Lucifer could also do. God gave several warnings, trying to avoid having a blot on history. Lucifer, however, began to plant in Eve the arrogant concept that he was the highest of all beings and that he could even become higher than God. As evil began to attack like waves washing against the shore, God endured tremendous pain and continued to admonish Lucifer. Finally, though, Lucifer became a criminal in the eyes of history. In other words, Lucifer began an illicit relationship with Eve. How can we even imagine how God must have felt when he learned of this? His heart overflowed with tears, grief, curses, and pain. God was in the Garden of Eden trying, together with the rest of creation, to soothe his grieving heart. How many days did this go on? How many years did it continue? In spite of God's feelings, Lucifer and Eve avoided him and accelerated their relationship as though they were crazy. Adam was still immature and didn't realize that God was going through such pain in his heart. All God could do was to treat the rest of creation as his companions and as his children. God lived in sorrow for years. As Eve grew into maturity, she began to realize that her relationship with Lucifer was wrong. She then began to plant in Adam the same insecurity and fear that she had received from Lucifer. Adam was immature. He looked upon Eve as less an object of lust and more as a woman who was quivering with fear. He wanted to help her, and so he comforted her and did everything that she asked him to do. This was the love between Adam and Eve. Adam, though, came to realize that Lucifer's love for Eve was far more passionate than his own. As time went by, the love between Adam and Eve became very complicated and stormy. This was the beginning of sinful history of our original ancestors. This became the root of humanity's original sin. How it must have pained God's heart to lose his children to Lucifer before he even had the chance to love them. Even in this painful position, God wanted to look upon his children from the position of parent. As a result of the human fall, however, God had no choice but leave his position as parent. From that moment, the parent-child relationship between God and humankind began to write a history of difficulty, pain, and grief. The parent-child relationship of love deteriorated to a position of hatred, curses, and nightmares. That is why this history now needs to be corrected. Lucifer needs to return to his original position and raise both hands to God in sincere apology. I believe that is the only way that the pain of restoration history and the history of God's grief can be resolved. February 10, 1999.